Whether you're in manufacturing or banking or pharmaceuticals, it has potential in all of these worlds. And I think that at some point in time, we will see every single person using virtual reality.
So if you want to know anything about immersive technologies, this is the podcast for you. I talked to Jeremy Dalton, one of the leading voices in immersive technologies.
I asked PwC if they would start up a dedicated VR AR team, to which they said no. And so 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, constant rejections.
Sounds like a crazy path to follow.
10 years, 20 years is not going to stop the industry from progressing. We've been pushing this for 1,000 years plus.
On various topics, all the way from the history of immersive technology, VR, AR, the metaverse.
In terms of adoption by industry, engineering and manufacturing was the industry that topped our list in terms of adoption of this technology.
Was there a manufacturing bias in those regions? We also talk about a very interesting use case, how VR is being used to establish an understanding of unconscious bias.
With their help, we created this VR experience, and it became part of the curriculum at PwC UK that was then deployed to every staff member, so all 25,000 staff. It's not about creating new data, but it's about using existing data in new ways, so creating new perspectives on existing data.
Make better use of the data we already have. I mean, factories are known for basically producing terabytes of data and not making use of it. All the way to the point where even VR facilitated meetings are much more impactful than normal video conferencing, or let's say better relationships with people versus video conferencing.
We saw a 16% improvement in communication, an 11% higher satisfaction, 15% greater comfort, and then finally...
So one of the commitments we made this year is to up our game with the guests that we bring onto the show to really offer benefit to anyone that's interested in our space. All we ask in return is for you to subscribe to our channel, like and share with the people that you think would benefit. Cool. Jeremy, once again, thanks for taking time out to have a conversation with me. I really appreciate it. So obviously today's focus is going to be centered around VR, or let's say immersive technologies as a broad term. And you're obviously a well-renowned, at least from my perspective, person that speaks a lot about the topic. I've learned a hell of a lot from your LinkedIn profile, your posts. I've recently started reading some of your articles on the PwC website. So certainly appreciate your the knowledge that you've shared with me before we even have this conversation. And I hope that from this conversation, many more people can actually benefit from the knowledge that you have. So certainly appreciate that. So the first question, Jeremy, is how did you go from from auditor to writing a book on virtual reality? Maybe just talk us through your journey. Like that sounds like a crazy path to follow.
I know, it's a weird and winding path, but I originally joined PwC for no other reasons than I thought it was a good, reputable company. And in fact, I was having a chat to the daughter of the person that hired me into PwC, because she's now working in the company, and our paths have crossed because of her interest in emerging tech. And I mentioned to her actually that the partner who hired me in, when I interviewed with him, I explained, as I'm explaining to you now, that I thought PwC is a good company. I thought it had a good reputation. And originally I applied to join business recovery, and audit was a part of that scheme. But I mentioned to him that I wanted to join business recovery because I simply thought it was interesting after having a look at a lot of different offerings in PwC. That was the one that excited me the most at the time. And he gave me the feedback that he really appreciated the candid nature of that answer compared to, I'm sure, many people were talking about wanting to join PwC and business recovery ever since they were a little kid and all that. So I think the candid nature of that answer was a positive way to go. So I joined PwC in 2011 in auditing, And that was only a 6-month program, which was very interesting and certainly helped me become or obtain my chartered accountancy qualification, which was a very hard fought battle. For anyone out there that is a chartered accountant, you have my greatest respect, particularly if you have an ACA qualification from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. You have even my even greater respect, because that was really difficult for me, and to this day remains the hardest thing I've ever had to do. This is coming from a person that has no accountancy background and all of a sudden was expected to become a chartered accountant. So I'm very glad I did that, though, and I actually credit that overcoming that challenge with creating the confidence to pursue my area of passion in PwC, that is virtual reality and augmented reality technology. So I was in audit for 6 months, then I was in business recovery for a year or two, and while there I got involved in projects like Lehman Brothers. PwC were the administrators in the UK for Lehman Brothers at the time. Got involved in the closure or the saving, depending on what the situation was, of a few other companies. But I really wanted to exercise some work in the emerging tech space. And so I was thinking of leaving PwC at the time. But thankfully, the firm had just started up its digital and emerging tech team. So I found my way into that and decided after a while that I really wanted to concentrate on one particular area. And the area that I chose, amongst artificial intelligence, VR, AR, of course, IoT, 3D printing, robotics, drones, and so on, was virtual reality and augmented reality, immersive technologies, because I just found that tech to be incredibly unique and such a visceral experience that I'd never had before with any of this other tech. And I could see the potential in both the consumer world and the corporate world. And so I asked PwC if they would start up a dedicated VR AR team, to which they said no. And so I asked again the year after that, and they still said no.
What year was this, Jeremy?
What's that?
What year was this?
This was around 2013.
Okay, wow.
And so 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016, constant rejections and rebuttals for my desire to start up this dedicated VR AR team. But in 2017, I found myself in the right place at the right time, the leader of a new division in PwC UK, a gentleman called John Andrews. He could see the potential of virtual reality and augmented reality, and I pitched to him, and he thankfully gave me the remit, the full-time remit in 2017 to kickstart PwC's first dedicated VR AR team. And here we are today, operating globally out of the United States, the United Kingdom, Italy, Nigeria, Poland, Belgium, Germany, France. So it's a very exciting, I'm very glad we're at this place today. I'm super excited to be continuing in the VR AR industry despite all the struggles, the ups and downs. I believe wholeheartedly in the technology, and I genuinely think that it's not something that is a business solution only, and it's also not something that is just an entertainment device only, but it has potential in all of these worlds. And I think that at some point in time, we will see every single person using virtual reality, or at least owning an XR device, let's say, alongside their laptop and their mobile phone. Now, I personally don't believe it's going to replace mobile phones. I think there's a lot of discussion around that, but I'm very much of the idea that this technology is a complementary technology. It has different usages in different times, so it's optimal for usage in different scenarios. And that is different from when a phone should be used and when a laptop should be used. And so I can see all three working together in tandem.
So a few years back, we scraped over 7 million UK and US businesses, and these were businesses across many different industries. It was architecture, education, manufacturing, professional services, real estate, and so on. And we looked at all of their publicly available information. So things like their websites, their annual accounts, their social media posts, all that sort of stuff, to try and find out exactly where they were applying XR technology. And then once we found all the results, we split them into different areas. So we split them into the technology, virtual reality versus augmented reality. We split them into geography, so the different provinces of the UK, the different states of the United States, different industries and different use cases. And what we found was really interesting. So in both the UK and the US, about 2/3 of all the applications we found were in the virtual reality space, 1/3 in the augmented reality space. A little bit more on the AR side in the US, but roughly that split. The second most interesting thing we found, or perhaps the first, depending on what your view is, in terms of adoption by industry, engineering and manufacturing was the industry that topped our list in terms of adoption of this technology. So 24% of all the from the engineering and manufacturing industry, and 19% of all examples that we found in the United States were from the engineering and manufacturing industry. The final thing I'll mention as well is that from a local activity or regional perspective, about 1/3 of all of the activity in the UK was from London, and about 1/3 of all the activity from the United States was from California. So a lot of interesting stats that came out of that analysis.
Okay. Were you able to look at, was it manufacturing in London and California, or was there a bias in those specific areas?
So there was no bias specifically, it's just what the data told us. So the data ended up showing that so much activity happening in London, which makes sense, and so much activity happening in California as well, which is not unexpected given a lot of the activity going on in those two areas of the UK.
Maybe let me rephrase the question. Was there a manufacturing bias in those regions, or was there London, California being kind of somewhat tech hubs, more focused on another use case of VR, apart from manufacturing?
I see what you mean. Yes, yeah. So I probably would need to look into the data more deeply, but if anyone is interested in checking it out right now, the data is actually available for you to pore through. Okay. It's got a little bit of a graphical interface. So if you go to pwc.co.uk/XR in industry, it will take you to a nice little interactive infographic, and you can select different regions and see which use cases in industries apply. So it's something we could do right after this podcast, dig into that data and see how much manufacturing is represented in London and California.
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll definitely put a link to that in the podcast. So Jeremy, the one other topic we spoke about was how you could form relationships, or let's say better relationships with people in VR versus what you would typically do in video conferencing. And given let's say some of the limitations we're now starting to realize with video conferencing when it comes to brainstorming and having the chat around the coffee machine, for example. Obviously, we learned a lot about that post-COVID. We also all accept it's not perfect for everything. And you kind of spoke about how VR might be that middle ground where you could still have remote work, but also have somewhat of a relationship or read the room, so to speak, kind of scenario. So what I decided to do was invite Dylan to the call. So Dylan is responsible for VR at GenderMark, so he creates all of our cool content. So let's see how you and Dylan can interact with each other, having not met each other before. Your avatars kind of do represent what you guys look like. And what I asked Dylan to do was please maybe open up the Odin VR webpage and maybe just talk you through that and maybe get your opinion on it.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
Okay, so Jeremy, I thought I'd use the opportunity to kind of talk you through one of Dylan's products, which is called Odin VR. So I've just started sharing my screen, and I'll go to his product page. If I can hit the button. Maybe what I'll do is I'll obviously not to go through all the details and just use this as an exercise to kind of get you to interact with Dylan. So some of the features that Dylan has created is obviously training for customers. So maybe Dylan, I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit about some of the examples that you've implemented, around this risk-free training topic.
So with risk-free trading, it's quite a nice debate in VR to do your like working at high fire evacuations. So that's one of the nice things about VR is you can simulate a lot of the negatives that you can't really do in real life. So you can't really just set a fire in your office. You can do fire drills and all that, but you can't actually set a proper fire to showcase people what to do if something like that would happen. Yeah. I think that's one of the more enjoyable ones that we've been doing lately is a lot of health and safety content. Just to simulate what would happen if you don't follow these procedures that are in place, why it is important that they are in place. Yeah.
I think some of the cool
and
ones.
also from a danger perspective, right? When you're trying to conduct a task that is potentially dangerous, virtual reality makes a lot of sense to use because you can evoke the same sort of emotions that you would have in such a dangerous situation without the actual danger of hurt or any damage happening.
Yeah. Some of the interesting ones are you very quickly see people who are afraid of heights. Sometimes people have to go and work on high towers, these cell phone towers, for example, and you quickly get to see who's afraid of heights. You just put them inside a VR.
I think we're starting to see a lot of academic evidence support that hypothesis of because it makes logical sense, right? As you're saying, the more you perform an action physically, even if it's not exactly the same feel and you don't get the same sort of feedback and pushback on your hands and your muscles, there is still an element of you moving to position your hands and fingers and arms and body, perhaps in some situations, in the right spaces and right positions, and that has got to count towards generating that memory profile and create that repeatability in the future.
Dylan, what is the most interesting application or little project that you may have done that you think has had a, let's say, significant impact on the customer?
I would say that would be health and safety content that we did. That was a fun little, well, not little project, but it was a fun project.
That's cool. And the other day Jeremy, I sent you those pictures of the team went to a special needs home and shared that content. I saw some people jumped into the roller coaster.
Yes, so a lot of them also did the roller coaster.
Oh no.
That's cool.
Yeah, the roller coaster one is always a controversial one because we usually say don't put people in a roller coaster in VR, but if the people want to go into a roller coaster in VR, there's not much you can do to stop them. I'm assuming they handled it well then?
Yes, they did. You can see them clenching the chairs a bit, but...
I'll admit, when I jump in the roller coaster, I close my eyes. Because I'm one of those guys that certainly struggles to separate the two. I kind of get into it, and I know full well, I keep telling myself, I'm sitting on a chair, this is not real, this is not real, this is not real, and then I'm scared.
Well, I think that's the great thing about virtual reality, right? And probably the basis for why it's such a powerful technology in business. It's the inability to discern the real from the virtual in the back of your mind. Yeah. So you can still have that emotional, you can still feel those emotions and that anxiety or whatever else you're trying to train for or be entertained by in the consumer sense.
Yeah. Jeremy, thank you very much. It's been a fantastic conversation, both on video and certainly more interesting in VR, in my opinion. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Give us a history of immersive technology. I mean, you mentioned 2013, which is I mean, 11 years ago already. I mean, when was this technology first used, and like, when were the first practical applications of it?
Yeah, despite me being involved in the VR AR industry for 11, 12 years now, I'm really just a baby in this industry. There are many who have far greater experience in virtual reality than I do. There are people, especially in the academic world, that were exploring virtual reality in the early 90s. There are those in the Department of Defense and other similar defense industries that were exploring virtual reality since the 60s. There were filmmakers that were exploring immersive tech back then as well. So I think there's this perception that virtual reality only came about in the last few years, which is absolutely not true. Some people believe that virtual reality started in 2012 with the release of the Oculus DK1. And don't get me wrong, the DK1, which was, for those of you who don't know, the DK1 was created by a chap called Palmer Luckey, who put this device on Kickstarter, looking for about $250,000 to bring this to life and to bring it to market. And we, the public, were so excited by it, we gave him $2.4 million to bring that to make it happen. And thus, I would say that action kind of snowballed into a lot of things. Facebook, now Meta, buying Oculus for $3 billion back in 2014. And all of these different companies now that we have getting involved. So yes, Palmer Luckey was definitely instrumental in resurrecting virtual reality and ushering us into this new age of VR. But there was a lot of explorations before that. I mentioned, stuff going on in the Department of Defense since the 60s. But even if I go further back from that, even if I go into the 19th century, so the 1800s, you can find devices called stereoscopes, and you may have some in your attics and your basements right now. Check them out, see if you have one. Your grandparents may have kept one. These devices, they were made of wood. They had two lenses in them. You put it to your face, and by putting a card into the back, which had a picture on each side, you could immerse yourself in a different world. It was virtual reality for its time. So truly amazing, the fact that these devices go so far back. And I don't want to turn this into a history lesson, but I recently gave a talk around entitled The 1,000-Year Quest for Virtual Reality. And this is all about the deep history. And I really mean 1,000 years back. And I'm working with Professor Anthony Steed in UCL on writing a book of the same name about this deep history of the technology. And my aim really is to show that humanity has been pursuing this immersion into other worlds or alternative realities for a very long time now, a very, very long time, far back than most of us believe and care to even think about. And I think that helps give us a little bit of perspective in the modern age of virtual reality when we find ourselves constantly complaining about how long it's taking VR to go mainstream. It's been years, whatever you think, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 70 years, 80 years. All of that pales in comparison to how long we have been spending generations through generations pushing this technology for all sorts of reasons, many of the use cases that we still pursue today. And I think that is actually really a heartwarming realization and a very positive one for the industry. 10 years, 20 years is not going to stop the industry from progressing. We've been pushing this for 1,000 years plus. And so please, I implore everyone to consider that when they get impatient with virtual reality.
Our ancestors will be pleased with you, Jeremy.
I hope I did them justice.
I would argue that a dream is a form of virtual reality, right?
Yeah.
So we've been dreaming since day dot.
That's it. And if we consider the philosophy of virtual reality around what you're saying, what is the objective of VR? It's to immerse ourselves in different worlds, right? That doesn't have to be achieved technologically. You're right. It could be achieved through dreams. It could be achieved through different media like books and movies. And I'm 100% on board with that, but I don't usually talk about that because people tend to switch off and think I'm going very philosophical. So I try to stick to the technology side of things when I talk about the deep history of the tech.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. So maybe could you debunk some of these phrases for us and maybe augment the answer with this hype cycle that we're obviously familiar with, this technology hype cycle? There's always a hype, then there's a reality, and then it actually starts to progress. There are these buzzwords, the metaverse, XR, VR, immersive, AR. Could you frame that for us to kind of let's set the right foundation to carry on the conversation?
It's unfortunately an absolute mess, and I don't know how we got ourselves tangled in so much chaotic vocabulary. I don't know if this is the same in other emerging technologies. I'm not an AI expert, so I should probably ask my colleagues if they face similar battles with vocabulary. But just from my what I can see in the space in other emerging technologies, I don't understand why we have this particular challenge, and I'm hoping it's not unique to us. But it's to start with. Let's talk about the metaverse, because that is or has been a recent phenomenon for those of you who weren't aware, and I don't think there are many of you. The word metaverse became very interesting around the time of the pandemic, around the time of Facebook changing their name to Meta. A lot of business leaders started to get really excited about this concept, and started to really push this message of the metaverse being this really special, unique, and exciting thing. And there was never a real understanding or agreed definition given. I give presentations regularly on the topic of the confusion around the metaverse, and one of the slides I like to bring up is this poll that was done asking investors in the metaverse what they thought the metaverse was. And the interesting thing is the most popular answer is it's a virtual world. And, that's not a bad starting point, probably needs a little bit more expansion, but, an acceptable base of a definition for metaverse. The next most popular answer, unfortunately, was a little bit more disappointing, where people said it's Facebook's new name. And yes, these are investors in the metaverse, mind you. Yes, it does.
I know you've done some research on the market reaction to all of this stuff. And is it a technology that one can actually make money out of yet?
Yeah, so we at PwC have made money out of virtual reality by deploying it into organizations and solving business problems with it. I have seen on a completely different level startups using virtual reality and augmented reality and creating some really great technologies and great solutions for the consumer market and the business market. If you look at the consumer world, we see now numerous titles that have generated millions of dollars in revenue. So I think there is, and also I should mention, virtual reality arcades are really starting to ramp up in terms of the revenue they generate for their owners. So it's a super exciting time, and nobody can claim that virtual reality is not making money. It's making money in so many different areas. It's certainly not as mature as many other industries, but the question of whether it's making money, absolutely, across all industries, across the consumer world and the business world, in many different areas.
So just talk a little bit more about the virtual reality arcades. That's something new to me. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've ever seen stuff like zero latency, and I can't remember, there's another competitor, Sandbox VR as well. These are companies that they rent out spaces and they kit them up with custom virtual reality hardware. So you go in with a bunch of your friends, maybe 4 other friends. You all get inducted on how to use their headset. You put on the headset. You find yourself in a virtual world, you select the game you want to play or the experience you want to have, and you can see each other. So you're all together in this virtual world, you can all see each other, and you're all working together to complete some objective. Now, usually it ends up, if you're in my group, it ends up being a zombie shooter. So we're all there firing off at these zombie hordes that are attacking us and having a great time. I've also played Squid Game in virtual reality. For those who haven't seen that, really interesting sort of dystopian video game show. And yeah, there's a load of other experiences you can choose from. But these VR arcades enable that. They take care of all the hardware, the technology. You just come there, you put on the headset, and you have a great time for half an hour, 1 hour or more, or whatever you want. And they have numerous groups running at the same time. So they may have 3 or 4 different stages or spaces happening at the same time. So you'll have a group of 5 here, a group of 5 there, a group of 5 there, all playing VR and being rotated out every half hour, 1 hour, paying anywhere, I can't remember now, but could be $30 per person, $50 per person, that sort of price range. And so you can see how it all starts to add up in terms of the revenue very quickly.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I'd like to experience that. Don't know of any of those in South Africa, but I guess it's a business opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly look at that.
In Business Insider recently about the up and coming revenue generating opportunities of VR arcades. So yeah, possibly if South Africa doesn't have one, I would definitely get on that immediately as a side hustle.
So one of the things that we at GenderMark have been using virtual reality for a number of years now is actually training for operators. So we design and build machines, and it's pretty useful to train the operator on how to use the machine while it's still being manufactured. So it's kind of a bit of a parallel process. Whereas in the past, it was very series. You'd have to make the machine and then start the training. So it kind of gets the operator up to speed a lot quicker. And I know that you've done some research with Ford. I think Ford were one of the early adopters. Do you want to talk us through what the findings were there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done a few studies over the years, and one of them is around the use of virtual reality for soft skills training. Now, the reason we did this is because we had the opportunity to run some inclusive leadership courses, or we run them as usual at PwC, and we have a classroom version and an e-learn version. And what we said is, okay, this is a really good opportunity to run a virtual reality version alongside the classroom and e-learn, and then compare all 3 modalities to see which one is really effective. And there are pros and cons of each one. It's not 100% virtual reality should be used in all instances. But what we found is that there is people are 4 times faster to train in virtual reality than they are in the classroom. They're 275% more confident about applying the skills they learned after training in VR. They're 3.75 times more emotionally connected to the material, and they're 4 times more focused than their e-learning peers. So you can see some connections there to manufacturing and to other industries, not just in the soft skills use case, but things like being able to focus more, things like being able to be more confident about applying the skills you learned. That stuff is cross-industry applicable results. So, really interesting findings there. The other more recent study that we've done, this was in collaboration with a colleague of mine in PwC Switzerland, Philip Sostman, as well as the University of Münster and the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Lower Saxony in Germany. And we were working on virtual reality projects with the ministry, and they were very forward-thinking in their approach. And they said, "Why don't we run this study?" And University of Münster came on board, and so we did this study to understand if you're trying to remotely collaborate with someone. Currently, our options are you give them a call, you get on a conference call, or you get on a video call. You add video to the call, basically. And we wanted to say, well, what if we used virtual reality? Would we see any difference in how collaboration happens? And again, we got different results. and to provide a balanced perspective, most of them, or a realistic perspective, most of them were positive, and there was one negative, which I'll talk about. But on the positive side, we saw a 16% improvement in communication. This is from using virtual reality instead of video conferencing. An 11% higher satisfaction with workshop results, a 15% greater comfort in being in a virtual reality meeting versus a video conferencing meeting. And going back to that point about comfort, this was not physical comfort, because anyone who's worn a virtual reality headset will agree it's not necessarily physically comfortable versus not wearing anything at all. But this was psychological comfort. That's why. So people were happy to be represented by their avatars in that meeting, so they didn't have to feel like they were being constantly scrutinized. And then finally, really significant result, we found a 58% greater sense of closeness to one's colleagues from using virtual reality. And that's absolutely incredible. 58% increase in closeness from using VR. That is a cross-industry, company size. Any company, any industry, any size can take advantage of this technology with those sort of results. So I think it has value in every company across these areas. So yeah, those are the two studies that are the most recent we've done. And there's a lot more stuff coming out around that. Philip and I are working with the University of Munster and the Ministry of Internal Affairs to release a more comprehensive report with a lot more data. Oh, I should balance things out as well by saying the one thing we did find that was not so positive is people were more fatigued in a virtual reality meeting. So they found themselves more exhausted after being in VR than they would do in video conferencing, which does make sense given the intensity of the experience and the having to wear a headset for the duration of that meeting. I think those were the two contributing factors if I were to hypothesize on the reason behind that result.
Yeah, I think we're now starting to see the realities of remote work and the disconnectedness of remote work. And I guess VR is the opportunity to actually be more connected, even though you're remote.
Absolutely. And, I personally love coming into the office. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in 5 days a week, but I'll be in half of the time, 2 to 3 days each week in the office. I enjoy the buzz. I enjoy chatting to my colleagues. I enjoy rapidly solving problems without having to necessarily set up a formal meeting every time you want to have a discussion about anything. But again, this goes back to moderation, right? Totally in-office working, not necessarily the answer 100% of the time. Totally remote working, not necessarily the answer. If we can find this balance where there's a bit of both, I personally think that's where the sweet spot is. And virtual reality can assist with the disadvantages of remote working. A lot of advantages of remote working, but one of the disadvantages is the lack of connectedness you feel to the colleagues that you speak to. When you're just a little video image or box in a screen of many of them. And virtual reality, as we've seen with this study, can really help create that sense of connection with our colleagues wherever they are in the world.
Yeah. I really find that I much prefer having face-to-face meetings. There's like I don't know, maybe call me old school, but you can read the room a lot better, especially if you're talking to customers. It's a lot more challenging to read the room when you're presenting to a potential customer online. Do you want to touch on the Ford outcomes? Because I thought that was pretty interesting.
So with Ford, I mentioned Ford in a book that I wrote called Reality Check. And Reality Check was all about trying to tackle the misconceptions of virtual reality. I think it's much better nowadays than when I wrote the book. But when I wrote the book, business leaders were very dismissive of virtual reality. They thought it was just a game, an entertainment device. It didn't really have any place in the business world. And I really wanted to tackle that misconception. So in this book, I included a load of case studies from companies from all over the world, from different industries. Every single case study had quantitative data attached to it to show the value of the technology being implemented in their line of work. And so Ford was just one of those examples that that I mentioned, and it was all about the use of the technology for not just vehicle design, which a lot of people are expecting nowadays and can see other companies using nowadays, but Ford actually used virtual reality in the early to mid 2000s to reduce production line injury. And they did that by testing the production line first in virtual reality. And what they would do is they would plan out the production line. You would, as an industrial athlete in Ford, as they're called, you would perform different actions. Maybe you'd be lifting a transmission over a gate. And they would analyze the ergonomics of all of your actions. So every time you moved your body, it would be scanned, and they would estimate what sort of stresses you're putting on your lower back and other areas by doing all this. And then they'd optimize. And every time they optimized, they could do that quickly because it was virtual reality and not the physical world. And they'd optimize and optimize and optimize. And eventually they'd get to a point where they agreed this is the optimal production line. And then they deploy that physically. So it was a great way of testing. Your production line before implementing it, reducing cost, reducing time, but also reducing injury. So Ford found that they reduced their injury rate of their more than 50,000 industrial athletes by 70% by using this technology in that way, which I thought was really incredible. And for those of you who are interested in exploring Ford's use of VR, definitely check out. Go connect with this lady called Elizabeth Barron. She did everything that Ford was doing around virtual reality. She was either leading or had a significant impact on. She's done some really cool stuff.
That's pretty cool. So that interestingly is the same use case we have with VR in our company. So we would test the ergonomics of a machine. So we have a couple of VR headsets in our company, in our design office in particular, and they would design a machine and they would put it into VR and actually check the ergonomics of the machine to see if they can reach inside. Interestingly, the biggest opportunity is actually the ergonomics for the maintenance crew. So do they have access to repair the machine? Where do you put the electrical panels? How do you remove a motor out of the machine in case the motor breaks? And so those are some of the interesting optimizations we've been able to make on our machine design to help with safety and ergonomics, as you say.
That's amazing. And when you say that, I'm thinking in my head, we're not only talking about ergonomics here, but we're talking about operational use cases. We're talking about health and safety use cases. We're talking about design use cases, accessibility use cases. All of these sub areas of value that virtual reality brings. It is truly an amazing technology.
Yeah. One of the challenges that we are facing is so we can create the simulation of a machine and we can use it ourselves. But when we hand that over to the customer, there's always been a challenge around the ease of which they can use the simulation, because they're typically production people and they want to run production lines, and their training departments are either online or face-to-face classroom paper-based. That transition into this new technology is actually a bit of a barrier that we're trying to overcome from our side. We actually find that as one of the key barriers to the adoption of the new tech. The other barrier was the management of the content. So we have some customers with, I don't know, probably 15, 20 simulations of different processes in their factory. And what we realized was there isn't a content management platform for VR content, specifically training content. So in the VR simulation, for example, we can build in a test question. You teach and then you can ask a question, you get a result out of the simulation. How do you log that result against Jeremy, for example? And so we currently have at one customer, a test case where we've actually built a VR LMS, learning management platform. So in there, you would put all of your content and an easy way for people to put the headset on, click a button, and start the content, and I can actually see who's logged in, get the result of the person that performed the test, and collect those results and graph it in a way that is useful for the training department. So it actually wasn't the VR itself that was the barrier, it was actually the use of it inside a factory seemed to be the challenge. I'll let you know. So we have one customer that's put all of their training, safety training, in VR, and they're using the learning management platform. So I think in a couple of months we'll get some real feedback on whether it's actually been adopted within the whole factory.
That sort of data is super useful, especially, and if you can quantify it, even better, in terms of the percentage of usage, the time usage per session, all that sort of stuff. It does remind me that one of the issues that I think the industry is facing right now is the lack of desire by companies to release data relating to their usage of virtual reality. And I've spoken to mostly actually the startups that deliver these solutions for these large companies. They know they're adding value. They have the quantitative data showing that there is a distinct return on investment that can be quantified. But whenever people ask for that data, the company blocks it because either for confidentiality reasons or for this perception of maintaining an edge in the market. And I think it does everyone a disservice, really, because this technology is going to be adopted by every company eventually. That is my belief 100%. And so holding back the potential of the tech is a missed opportunity to show oneself as an innovation leader in that space. And if you look at some of our studies, in PwC, these are being quoted all over the world. So if you, and I'm not talking about you, Yanesh, specifically, but if you as a company, I'm talking to everyone here who's involved in virtual reality, release any data, positive data relating to your use of VR, you may find yourselves, as an innovation leader or viewed as an innovation leader by many in the market as a result of doing that. And it may be a lot cheaper than conducting a completely different marketing exercise. So consider that when you have this data that could be potentially useful in the market.
Yeah. I'll ask the customer that's adopting it to see if they'd be willing to share, because as you say, where we are at the moment, I think the more people that talk about it, the better. And the perception of that particular customer as being an innovator in the space can have significant impact on their business.
Absolutely.
Training is obviously one use case. We've spoken about video conferencing and how that's more engaging and fulfilling, if you want. Are there any other use cases that make sense, that have an impact from a business perspective, or for businesses rather?
Yeah, so training, remote collaboration. I'd say the third one is going to be asset visualization. So this is being able to see items, objects, machinery, physical material, buildings, vehicles, whatever it is, objects of interest virtually wherever you are in the world through this technology. And that has numerous uses across different industries. It has applicability in architecture, engineering, construction, manufacturing, any company that is involved in the building, maintenance, or operations and running of physical assets. Even the real estate industry, for example. There is value to using this technology for visualizing those physical assets, and not only visualizing existing assets, but visualizing assets that haven't even been built yet. And especially for that use case, in fact, when you're trying to get across to an important stakeholder where you are in the journey of building this building or constructing this new design of vehicle, or machining this part, and showing how it fits in with other parts, as we were talking about earlier. Asset visualization is really key. And I think it also has applicability in the geospatial era, in fact. So one of the applications we recently built for the Apple Vision Pro is called Geospatial Insights, and we showed this off at VivaTech in Paris, at Cannes Lions in France, and it's all about visualizing 3D map data in a very immersive way. So we're able to bring up any city in the world, put it on your table. You can walk around it. You can zoom in, zoom out. You can apply a data layer on top of that. So anything to do with, for example, air pollution, live footfall, seeing where people are moving throughout that city. You can access and view all of that data on this platform, which is truly amazing. And I think that has a lot of potential as well for all sorts of different industries that find geospatial data interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So if because you mentioned Paris, I have a view of Paris on my table here, and you can augment the pollution stats, and see that graphically.
Exactly. Yeah. You can have you can see in this area it's highlighted in green, and then as you cross the river, for example, it starts to become orange and then red. And for the live footfall data, we're exploring how we visualize this in different ways. But the way we did it in VivaTech is we had these sort of pulsating lights that got brighter and brighter the more there was people in that particular area. So you could very quickly see out of the corner of your eye where all the hot spots of activity were throughout the day. So you'd use your hand to change the time of day. So it would go from 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 10 a.m. and so on. And then you could see the map changing in line with you moving that time and with the data relating to live footfall at that particular time. So it was really, people really loved going through that experience and could see the potential there.
That's very cool. I'm imagining, coming back to manufacturing again, I've got a view of a production line on my table, and I can augment productivity data based on the 50 stations that are, that make up that production line. And I can have a top view and have a look at the hotspots of where there's problems actually. Because that data exists, and you'd see that on a typical 2D chart or Excel sheet or something. If I can augment that on the physical or the virtual version of that production line and look at it literally from the top, it would change, where or it would help me identify where to focus.
Yeah, or create different vantage points, right? Go 1-to-1 scale, like enter one of the aisles between two machines and then view the entire factory from that perspective. Maybe have one of the things we're talking about is multi-user collaboration. So bring someone in from a different part of the world, join in the virtual factory together, point out things in that direction, see what could be going wrong here or there. The asset visualization use case combines with the remote collaboration use case in that sort of example.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm gonna task that, give that task to some of our team, see if we can do something like that, because I think that would have significant benefit to plant leaders, to help identify problems and also expose different people to different areas within that particular plant.
And it's not about creating new data, but it's about using existing data in new ways. So creating new perspectives on existing data.
Yeah, or make better use of the data we already have. I mean, factories are known for basically producing terabytes of data and not making use of it.
How do you make that more accessible? How do you make it more digestible, understandable? How do you increase the pace of understanding? So if we were to present all of that data on a 13-inch laptop screen versus all of that data in an immersive experience. Now, I don't have the study to say whether that will produce a quicker realization or translation of the data or analysis of the data. But I would hypothesize that we would, in certain scenarios, see an increase in the speed of understanding by using immersive technology for data analysis.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. again, I'll put that on our to-do list and let you know if we have some data to share with you.
That would be amazing.
I listened to one of your previous podcasts, and you spoke, or somebody that you were having a conversation with was speaking about 360 video as an opportunity in VR or immersive technology as well. So we've also had a similar experience in that we find creating 360 video with a simple Insta-X3 camera on how to do an inspection on a fork truck is an example of what we did for a particular customer. And we filmed it in 360 with the person narrating the steps that need to be followed. And then somebody that was doing the training was able to put the headset on and actually experience it as though that the person was standing right next to them. It was a pretty simple, quick opportunity to actually get people to use the immersive tech. What's your experience been with 360? Although the resolution wasn't great, because it's obviously not the most expensive camera, but the technology exists. It's just a bit of a cost barrier for us. What's your experience been with 360 video?
One of the earliest projects that our team pursued in PwC in the mid-2010s in virtual reality was using 360 video. And to this day, we still use 360 video. In fact, I was having a conversation just 2 hours ago with one of the building managers here in PwC London, and we were talking about the use of 360 video to showcase the space in a more in an easier to understand way, or a better way than just a 2D photo. So again, 360 video remains part of our discussions to date. Which is amazing. I personally think it has a lot of value. I've seen it deliver a lot of value. There was a time that it went out of vogue and people concentrated on 6DoF use cases. So for those who don't know, 6DoF, 6 degrees of freedom. This is the idea that in a virtual reality experience, you can not only look around, so look up, down, left, right, and rotate, but you also have these extra 3 degrees, so you can move backward, forward, you can move up and down, and left and right, and so on. So people got really excited about 6DoF and all it can do, and 6DoF is fantastic for certain use cases. 3DoF still works well for many use cases too, even today. And I would say since Apple brought out spatial video, which is effectively stereoscopic video, which goes going back to the history lesson, goes back to the stereoscopes of the 1800s, where you would present, a different image to each eye, exactly, and through the lenses. The same technology we use today in all our headsets, by the way. That, even though it wasn't new, Apple bringing it to market has certainly changed the conversation in terms of people's confidence in that technology. So people are very excited about it again. So whether, and I'm all for it, whether it's Apple or another company, I don't really care. I've always known the value of 360 video, or stereoscopic video, I should say, and it definitely does have value. The reason I move around with these terms is I'm thinking in my head, actually, 360 video is a form of stereoscopic video, but there's also 180 video. So instead of getting a full 360 degrees, you're getting 180. So all the way round, out to the sides, left and right. And that's Apple's spatial video format. But it's very closely related to 360, except you only have half of it, of course. It's a form of stereoscopic video, and ultimately, the argument I'm making is that they have helped to boost the reputation for stereoscopic video, whether that's 360 or 180, which is great to see, because these technologies do have value. They always have had value, they still have value, and they will remain having value into the future, because we need to be able to record in the virtual world and display that immersively. It's not just about creating computer-generated graphics. Computer-generated graphics work for some use cases, 360 video recordings of the real world or 180 video recordings of the real world work better for others. You're not gonna, you wouldn't necessarily live stream a sports game using computer generated graphics. That's just the wrong use case. Equally, if you're trying to, let's go to video games now. If you want to create a compelling video game, you're not going to record in the real world because you have so much more creative oversight and artistic license in a completely virtual world that you can control and enhance.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of 360. I think the barrier to create content is much lower than computer-generated graphics. And if I have an expert that knows how to inspect the fork truck, it's a matter of filming them correctly. It doesn't take too long, and allowing multiple people to benefit from that experience is much easier to get to than creating a virtual reality version of that same experience. So I'm a big fan of 360 video. I just need to get I hope the prices of 360 video devices comes down because they're pretty pricey. There's a big step change once you go to professional gear. I wanted to ask your opinion on AR. So I have up until now been a skeptic. I've tried AR in real life factories and multiple types of AR, whether it be for maintenance guidance or operator guidance or just superimposing live data on assets. And none of it has actually materialized into a significant benefit to the customer. The cool factor was certainly there, but no wide-scale adoption. I don't know what your experiences has been with AR.
Yeah, so mostly, well, let me start with one of the reports that we wrote. It was called Seeing is Believing, and it was an economic analysis of both virtual reality and augmented reality globally. So the highlight or the key fact or result of this report was we found that we expected there to be I can't remember the figure now. It will come back to me, but a very large amount of money contributed to global GDP as a result of implementing virtual reality and augmented reality, and we expect it to enhance jobs in different areas. One of the interesting insights we found is actually the augmented reality contribution to that global GDP number was it started off approximately the same as virtual reality, but then very quickly became it overtook virtual reality into, I think we were exploring till 2030. I've got the report open here actually, and yeah, it was $1.5 trillion. Yeah, so VR and AR have the potential to add $1.5 trillion to the global economy by 2030, and that was split between AR and VR. And we wanted to be able to understand how would that split over the next 10 years. And what we found is by 2030, that $1.5 trillion figure was approximately 1 trillion AR and $500 billion VR. And high level, and this is consumer and business, by the way. And the reason for that is twofold. One, you have much greater access to the technology now because effectively, if you have a smartphone, chances are you already have an augmented reality device in your pocket to be able to use. Yep. Secondly, a lot of people find themselves more comfortable in augmented reality scenarios or scenarios where they're still in the physical world. So for that reason, or for those were two of the key drivers behind that disparity. Now, this is not to say that AR is better than VR, not at all. It's just to say from an economic contribution perspective, which considers both the consumer and the business market, that was our expectation at the time. But I think the best way to think about this is to split AR and VR very distinctly in your minds about what these technologies are and what they can do, because yes, there is a little bit of an intersection in terms of where it makes sense to use AR, where it makes sense to use VR, and sometimes you can have remote collaboration in both. For example, you can collaborate when you're still in the real world. You can collaborate when you're in a completely different virtual world. But at the end of the day, they're very distinct. And to answer your question, you were questioning around what my view is on augmented reality, right?
Yep. Yeah, the effectiveness of it.
Yeah, and I have seen effective augmented reality applications, especially in industry. But you know what the surprising thing is? Those scenarios are not super cutting edge technology by any means, and many in the industry wouldn't consider them augmented reality. They'd consider them under a separate section called assisted reality, some call it, and I use assisted reality in my book Reality Check as well, to try and differentiate from it. But this idea that you're wearing a head-mounted display that gives you a piece of information with very easy access to your point of view or your eyesight while you're performing action on a certain task. So that achieves two things. One, it creates efficiencies in allowing you to move from the operation at hand to the information at hand and back. And then secondly, it gives you hands-free access, which allows you to use your hands for other things and other objectives in business. Now, those two are key advantages, but they're only advantages with use cases that make use of them. So if you are pursuing a business objective where it doesn't mean much, you're not necessarily doing anything physical, or you know how to perform the task already, you don't need that information in front of you, or you're not constantly referring back and forth to it, maybe the advantages are not that great, in terms of implementing that tech. But for the large part, I would say people overestimate the amount of technology needed to get a result, to solve a business problem. And you can solve business problems using a very basic form of augmented reality, which I've just described as assisted reality.
Yeah. So I think your point is well taken in that it depends on the use case. It's not for everything. So the two scenarios I'll share with you where I would say, have had failures was, the one was on an engine assembly line. The customer wanted a production line, and it's a very complex engine, high variation, high cycle time. So the operators had many steps to do in one station, and because there's many variants, each engine was basically different. And so we gave them, I would name the brands, but an AR headset with a little camera inside, a little screen on the eye, so they could glance up and have a look at the instructions. And so technically it worked, and we got it to interface into the input to the line, and so we were displaying the right information to the operator. But after 2 hours, the headset was getting flat. So we then provided battery packs to last 8 hours, and then it was getting hot, and then it was uncomfortable. And after like 2-3 days, those things were left on the side. So that was the one use case where it didn't quite make sense. And the second one was actually during COVID, when we had a lot of remote installations happening with people that didn't have the skills on the other side of the world to install some of our machines. So we could ship machines, but we couldn't fly there. So we then shipped a set of, again, I won't name the brands, AR headsets with the machine so that they could put it on, use TeamViewer, and we could TeamViewer with each other, and our techs could guide the techs on the other side to install machines. And very quickly, what ended up happening was they ended up using, in some cases, WeChat or WhatsApp, depending on where it was happening. And then the cameras weren't clear enough to actually see what was going on. So then they'd have a quick video chat with the phone, and then actually throw the headset away and actually use the phone to replace the headset. So it's a kind of augmented reality, but actually using like you say, the phone in the device, the AR headset you have in your pocket already. So that was also a bit of a fail, I guess a reality check, excuse the pun, but so I think there's certainly, there must be use cases where it makes sense, else there wouldn't be $1 trillion allocated to it. But from our practical experience on shop floors, I think we've still got a way to go in terms of its reliability, the number of pixels in the camera to transfer the information halfway across the world. the latency in providing live metrics on a machine. While I'm looking at a machine, I want to see the live data. It must go to the cloud, come back down, and then it's too late anyway. So I think there's some practical steps that need to be done. I think there's huge potential conceptually, but we haven't quite experienced that. And in complete contrast, I think VR has certainly this year had almost a hockey stick increase in interest, and certainly customers willing to spend on VR. Just to contrast the two from our experience.
Yeah, and to be honest, we have had similar results. So despite the expectation, and to be honest, we're not at 2030 yet, but despite the expectation that AR would contribute a greater amount to global GDP, for now, we have found much more interest in the virtual reality side of things. Now, that may change as we start to get devices that blur the line between what is a VR device and what is an AR device. So the Meta Quest 3, the Apple Vision Pro, Pico Neo 4 Enterprise, stuff like that, where you're able to switch between a form of augmented reality and virtual reality. I think people will decide which modality they want to use for which application. All the factors you mentioned, I think, are really valid, and battery power has always been an absolute nightmare, which is really holding things back. The other thing I noticed, though, is there are lots of confounding factors or dependent technologies for AR sometimes to make those use cases work, which puts them in further danger of being unsuccessful. So, for example, an internet connection at the client site, if it's bad, could result in this increased latency, could result in grainy images, are not useful to see. I'm not saying it happened in your case, but I know of situations where the VR or AR technology has been made unviable because of dependent technology, but not because, and if it was standalone, it would have been successful. And maybe that partly could be a reason why we find virtual reality implementations very successful, because often, at least for us, our VR implementations are not, I was going to say they're not reliant on another internet connection, but actually remote collaboration, they very are reliant on another internet connection. But I guess they don't actually require as much bandwidth as you might think being in a VR meeting versus a video call, because you've already got the 3D models loaded on the headset. You just need information about how different parts of the 3D model are moving. So hands are going here, faces rotating there, and things like that. So there's less bandwidth requirements on those sort of use cases than AR.
Yeah, and I think we're also more accustomed to, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So it being accepted in VR is a little bit more accepted than, at least again, my bias is factory shop floors, where reliability is obviously key. Latency is your enemy on a shop floor. So I wanted to ask you a question on something that I know some research that you've done on unconscious bias. Maybe talk to us a little bit about what is unconscious bias and the research that you've done.
Yeah, so this was more an application that we created. It was commissioned by our people team in PwC UK that wanted to create an immersive module for tackling unconscious bias in the workplace. So unconscious bias refers to the actions or the reactions that you have to situations that are a result of the way your environment, the way you grew up, with who you grew up, with the people around you or who have been around you most of your life. So when engaging with someone from a different culture, a different race, a different background, we all carry some form of unconscious bias. And this is not anything as strong as racism or sexism, which is more conscious bias, and in many cases. But this is more around, sometimes we can come across in different ways that are the result of our upbringing and our environment. And those ways and the way we communicate to others they can be They can be found offensive. They can be perceived as in different ways than we mean them. And we do that because of our unconscious bias. And so we try to create a module, an immersive module, to assist with a whole series around tackling unconscious bias. And the reason why we turn to immersive technologies is because it's a great way of immersing you in an environment, in a situation, making you feel like you're on the receiving end of a certain a microaggression, perhaps, or a certain scenario. And so we built this scenario in collaboration with our multicultural business network at PwC. And the individuals there were very kind enough to offer up their stories of unconscious bias in the workplace that they've experienced before. And they helped to craft the narrative of this experience that we produced. So with their help, we created this VR experience, and it became part of the curriculum at PwC UK that was then deployed to every staff member, so all 25,000 staff. So it was a really worthwhile, valuable project, and a great use of VR for good, and also a technological feat of excellence, and I guess great show of modesty here. But we were very excited at the time, because we actually built this initially for Quest 1 using volumetric capture technology and with computer generated backgrounds that looked like they had real-time lighting instead of preset baked lighting. And so that required a lot of optimization and a lot of clever messing around with the code and shader code and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, we were very proud of the outcome as a result of that. You had these realistic people in this realistic world running on what now we would consider low-end hardware. And so that has been very successful for us, and it was so successful in PwC that we eventually we started selling it to clients outside of PwC, because they wanted to have something so impactful too. And we worked with the University of Surrey to analyze the implementation of this experience across our 25,000 staff. And I can't remember the exact figures, but if you look at this bar chart, it compares people's level of empathy with no training, people's level of empathy with, and this is towards other individuals from a different race. So we have no training. The second bar is our experience in my shoes but on desktop, and the third bar is in my shoes but in virtual reality. And what you see is that the level of empathy increases from no training to the desktop training, which of course you would expect. But the interesting part is when you take the same content, which was on a desktop screen, and you put it in a VR headset that is now immersive, you see a jump in that increase in empathy. So we thought that was quite an exciting result and a really interesting observation.
Yeah, that's amazing. It just shows you that VR presents content in a very different way. It makes you feel it as opposed to just know it. So same thing with the... Yeah, exactly. So I was just going to say, I'm sure you've been in the elevator with the wooden plank across the...
Richie's building. Plank experience.
Yeah, so we actually have a little demo in our VR room here. We actually have a physical plank. And we put somebody in VR headset, and they go in the elevator, and they actually walk on the plank. And it's amazing how some people just know that they're in a normal building, and they like jump off the building, and some people just cannot, and they walk back on the plank, like making sure they don't fall off, but they feel like they're going to fall.
Yeah, I've had exactly the same experience at PwC. The funny thing is, I bet you if we asked around, everyone in the VR industry probably has a similar experience of people going through Richie's plank experience, and that feeling of knowing you're in a safe room, knowing you've got the floor beneath you, but still not wanting to jump off the virtual plank of wood. It's quite incredible. And it does actually, you're right, it does that exact experience showcases the power of the technology. in convincing your mind that you're in this different world. So this is the achievement, going back to the very beginning of this talk, the history of virtual reality. We've been trying to immerse people in these other worlds convincingly for so long now. We are there in terms of achieving that. We just have to work on the user experience and the other challenges that I mentioned, cost, content, and education as well, or understanding of the value of the tech.
And speaking about emotional impact, the one LinkedIn post that you made that triggered me to actually get in contact with you to invite you onto the podcast was when you showed in an old age home people using VR to create experiences that they would, because of their age, would never have a chance to experience again. And to that, actually this Friday, and I'll send you some pictures, we're going to an old age home with some VR content to replicate the video that you actually shared on your LinkedIn, because I thought that was a fantastic use case of using technology to actually change people's experiences and lives.
Yeah, I love hearing these stories, and I think that is amazing. I love it when older generations use virtual reality too. I see incredible value. A lot of people think younger generations are going to lead the way, but actually virtual reality, from what I've observed, solves a real problem for the older generations, people who are maybe stuck at home, can't access the outside world easily, maybe in hospice, find it difficult to go about, have mobility challenges. Anyone who suffers from that, this technology can help alleviate the pain of those experiences. So I think that we have a lot yet to see in that space, and I think it's a real growth area for the tech and a beautiful VR for good human story.
So the last question, Jeremy, is you've got close to 50,000 followers on LinkedIn. I've started my LinkedIn journey about 2 years ago now. How did you get to be so successful on LinkedIn? It's a very interesting journey that I'd like to know more about.
Yeah, sure. I would say it's probably two or three things. One is consistency. So saying that, I probably need to improve my consistency these days. But I know the theory at least, if not the doing. But being consistent on LinkedIn is really important. So regularly taking part in a lot of different type of engagement. So it's not only creating posts, but also posting, like commenting on other people's posts, resharing material, liking material. All of that helps to keep you in the conversation, that exposes you to different people, which potentially leads to more connections and more engagement and collaboration. So that's two things there. So the consistency and the widespread nature of the engagement. And then the third thing is time. I guess time and also targeting. So I have been dedicated to virtual reality and augmented reality for 12 years now, something like that, and I've only been posting on LinkedIn about virtual reality and augmented reality stuff. So my whole brand is around VR and AR, and everybody knows I'm all about VR and AR. So anybody that wants to connect or is in the VR AR industry has a reason to connect with me too. So I think signposting oneself in a very easy, understandable way and a clear way, sort of targeted way for a long period of time also helps. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thanks for that. I'll try and, like you say, the theory is one thing. Doing is something completely
exactly
different.
What usually happens, if you look at my LinkedIn activity, it shoots up over a period of a few weeks, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. There's articles out there, there's posts, there's engagement everywhere, and then it will drop to like 0 for another 2 weeks, and there'll be absolutely nothing, not a single comment. So it's very much like, it's very volatile.
Yeah. Jeremy, thanks for taking time out.
No, my pleasure.
Really appreciate
it's a fun conversation.
Yeah, and look forward to having more conversations and sharing more content. I'm pretty sure that the people we share this podcast with will certainly benefit. And once again, keep up the good work. I keep learning from what you do.
Thank you so much. Same here. Like, I really enjoy hearing the stories of how you've implemented VR and AR. So let's keep the discussion going.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you very much.